Hey everybody, this is Andre here, covering for Kevin on the Kevin Breeze channel, and in this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2021 and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2020. To get more information on the pricing and availability of these phones, be sure to check the links in the description. With that being said, let's get started. So the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2021 has a 6.8-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 386, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of 84.8%. The Moto G Stylus 2020 has a 6.4-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 399, and a screen-to-body ratio of 83.7%. Both of the phones have a hole punch for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 16 megapixels for both of them. Now, definitely you can tell by looking at them, the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2021 is a lot bigger. They definitely increased the size of this phone with the new generation, and it may or may not be very visible, but the bezels for the Moto G Stylus 2021 are also a little bit smaller as well. So overall, the display is going to be a lot larger, which is great for content consumption. As far as the quality of the display, both of them have the same resolution in 1080p, and they both have an IPS LCD display, so it's going to be the same as far as that goes. But again, as you can clearly see from putting them side by side, the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2021 is a lot bigger, and in the case of things like content consumption, it's going to give a much better experience. For both of these phones, I really like the front-facing camera. The hole punch gives it a nice modern look. And with both designs, they're really sleek phones, so it just enhances the appearance even more. Now, both of these phones have 128 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD expansion. So they didn't change the storage with the new generation, but it's still really great. 128 gigabytes is definitely a good amount. To put that into perspective, iPhones actually start out at 64 gigabytes of internal storage, and they don't have the option to expand that storage with a microSD card. So really, these phones are already a bit better off, even though the iPhone is a lot more expensive than these ones. To give you an idea of what this looks like on the phone, both of these phones have not only the system, but a few basic apps as well. Right now, the Moto G 2020 on the right has 24.47 gigabytes that are being used, only taking up 19%, and then the Motorola Moto G 2021 is using 19.66 gigabytes, and as you can see here, only 15%. Neither of these are breaking 20% right now, and as you can tell, you definitely have a lot of free space. Even if you run larger apps or have a lot of photos and videos, you can always expand that storage with a microSD card if you have to. So storage-wise, you're really unlikely to have problems with these phones, no matter what your situation is. Now, the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2020 has no wireless charging, and they didn't change that with the 2021 because neither of these phones do, which is a little unfortunate. I would say if the charging ports do get damaged for whatever reason, it's always nice to be able to charge the phone still with wireless charging, just as a last resort at least. That feature is typically used more in higher end and flagship phones than it is in mid-range and entry-level phones. But it would be nice to see it implemented in more phones because these days, more and more manufacturers are doing away with things like headphone jacks and charging ports and all of that. And it would be nice to see some sort of alternative way of charging just in case something gets damaged. Now, both of these phones have not only a fingerprint scanner, but also face unlock. Now, between the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2020 and the 2021 model, they did change the location of the fingerprint scanner, and I actually really like the new one a lot. So the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2020 has a fingerprint scanner right here, which is really nice, convenient to use. As you're going to see in a minute, it's really fast and responsive. There's no problem with it. But the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2021 has a fingerprint scanner on the power button itself, and I personally think that's really hard to beat. Whether it's on purpose or just out of habit, you're most likely gonna touch the power button when you're unlocking your phone anyway. So it's really nice to have the fingerprint scanner right there. So when you're impulsively touching the power button, it'll unlock as well, making it even faster. The only way I can think of that's actually faster than this is Maybe if you have face unlock and just happen to tap your screen and it's pointing right at your face, but you can't do that in your pocket. So still, I do think the fingerprint scanner on the power button is the best, but let's give them both a try now. We're gonna start with the Moto G Stylus 2020. There we go. Really fast and responsive. Let's try it one more time. As you can see, there's no problem here. It's definitely good, and really having it right here where your finger kind of naturally rests is pretty convenient, and it's not awkward or uncomfortable like some of the older fingerprint scanners on the phones that were around when the technology was first being implemented, and really I have no problem with it. We're about to test the fingerprint scanner for the Moto G Stylus 2021. There we go, one more time. So as far as speed and reliability goes, they're both pretty much the same. They're really fast and responsive, no issues with them at all. Some of the fingerprint scanners, I've seen this typically in the on-display ones, have a few problems. Sometimes they don't recognize your finger right away, but these ones are really easy to use. Absolutely no problem, not really a whole lot to say about them. Having the fingerprint scanner here on the power button is just so great. I'm really glad they made this change, and I hope that more manufacturers start doing the same because it's really hard to beat a fingerprint scanner on the power button in my opinion. And now taking a look at the camera setups here. So for the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2021, we got a 48 megapixel rear camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. For the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2020, we got a 48 megapixel rear camera, a 16 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. Now, one thing to note about the ultra wide camera for the Moto G Stylus 2020 is that it's only usable during video mode. But the good news is, although the megapixels are a bit lower for the Moto G Stylus 2021, the ultra-wide camera is not only usable in video mode anymore. You can actually use it for photos, which I think makes the most sense. So that's great. So this is the regular camera mode for the Moto G Stylus 2021. The picture is really good quality. The image is crisp. The colors are well balanced. I have no complaints here. Definitely what you would expect out of a 48 megapixel camera. So we're in ultra-wide mode now. It is really nice. I don't see a whole lot of distortion. It might be slightly warped on this edge here, but it's not really that noticeable. The colors are still balanced, and a lot of times when a phone has an ultra-wide camera, it does get a little blurry when you go into ultra-wide mode. It did happen with one of the more entry-level Samsung phones I was testing out. It got a little bit blurry when it went into ultra-wide mode, but this phone's not doing that. In ultra-wide mode, it still looks pretty crisp. I don't really see any problems there. The only thing, again, is a little bit of warping on the edges, which ultra-wide cameras sometimes just do that. So it's not really that much of a surprise to me. But overall, I do like it and I think it looks good. So testing out the macro mode, I'm really picky when it comes to macro cameras. Most of the time when I use one, especially on an entry-level or mid-range phone, I'll always find something wrong with it that I really don't like. But this macro camera actually looks really good. Usually it either has some sort of weird thing where it's jumping in and out of focus or there's some weird glare, but really, there's not really much of a problem with this one. It's really good. It gets all the close-up details that you would expect, and the lighting is actually okay. So this is the front-facing camera for the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2021. It's definitely not bad. The colors are a little off, in my opinion. They're not really balanced the way that the rear camera colors are. It looks a little bit more dull, but the image quality is pretty crisp, and I could definitely work with this. So this is portrait mode for the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2021. I think this portrait mode looks really good. It recognizes the subject well. Obviously, this camera in between me and the actual phone itself is not really helping a whole lot, but it does recognize my face as the subject and it's blurring the background appropriately. Sometimes the blur comes into the subject, which is the worst thing about portrait mode in some of these front-facing cameras. This one still really does look pretty good. It doesn't look too obnoxious. It's not too much, but it's just enough for it to look professional. Another thing I like about this is that you can control the blur of the background. If you don't want it to be blurred so much, you can decrease it. And if you want it to be blurred a ton, then you can increase it. And I think that's cool. And that's a really nice feature to have. I always say that when it comes to taking photos, especially if you're doing any sort of serious photography like content creation, something like that, it's always good to have control over as many aspects of the photo as you possibly can while you're taking the picture, because then when you go to edit it, it takes a lot less energy and work when you could just have it take it right on the camera the first time. So this is the camera mode for the Moto G Stylus 2020. It looks really similar, pretty much the same as the Moto G Stylus 2021. So there's really not a whole lot of change in the regular rear camera. The colors are still really balanced. The image is still really crisp. Still no complaints. This is the macro mode for the Moto G Stylus 2020. I do like the macro mode still. It still gets the details really well. I noticed that the background is a little bit brighter on this phone than the Moto G Stylus 2021. So make of that what you will. I'm personally not a big fan of how it's handling this exposure. I think it's just a little bit too much, but if you play around with the angle, you can kind of get it a little bit. Oh, not like that. But overall, I think it is decent and it's still usable. I think they definitely made at least a little bit of an improvement on the macro camera with the Moto G Stylus 2021. Because even though the details on this are good and the image looks pretty good, the exposure is still not really that great. You can kind of adjust the brightness on the side here, but it still doesn't really look that natural. Whereas with the Moto G Stylus 2021, you didn't have to do anything, it would look just right. Now this is the front-facing camera for the Moto G Stylus 2020. It does look really similar. I honestly like the colors on this one a little bit better than the Moto G Stylus 2021. This looks a lot more real, it looks pretty much natural, whereas the colors on the Moto G Stylus 2021 looked a little bit off. I had to put them side to side just to make sure I'm not seeing things. Yeah, if you see on the Moto G Stylus 2021 on the left, the colors just aren't as real and normal looking as the colors on the Moto G Stylus 2020 on the right. They look a little bit more drained, a little less saturated, whereas with the Moto G Stylus 2020, it looks a little bit better, it looks a little bit more natural and real. Overall, I do like the image on the front-facing camera for the Moto G Stylus 2020 a little bit better. Now this is portrait mode for the Moto G Stylus 2020. It definitely does look good. Again, you can control the blur of the background on the little bar here, and that's definitely nice. I definitely think that overall, when it comes to the camera, I would say because of the extra features in the general quality of the normal camera, the Moto G Stylus 2021 does have a better camera. They've definitely made some improvements. I'm not sure what exactly is up with the front-facing camera. I did play around with it beforehand and make sure they're both on the same settings, so I'm not sure why there's such a difference, but I do like the colors and the general image of the front-facing camera on the Moto G Stylus 2020 a little bit better. But that being said, if I'm looking at it from a holistic point of view, I do think the Moto G Stylus 2021 does have the better camera because the quality of the rear camera, especially the macro camera, is a little bit better. And it does have a usable ultra-wide camera without having to go into video mode. So overall, they have made improvements. I do hope that the future version of the Moto G Stylus does end up having a better front-facing camera though, because I think they went a little bit backwards on that. Another thing I would like to point out is that the Moto G Stylus does have a depth sensing camera, which is going to make portrait mode a little bit better on the rear camera. Now internally, the Moto G Stylus 2021 is getting 4 GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 678 processor, and the Moto G Stylus 2020 is getting 4 GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 665 processor. Now these are both good processors. As you can see here, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on these phones a little while ago. The Moto G Stylus 2021 has a single core score of 538 and a multi-core score of 1588. Compared to the Moto G Stylus 2020's single core score of 312 and multi-core score of 1358. So they definitely did make improvements in the processor. It's going to be noticeably faster, and we're going to test that out right now. So we're going to open up Google Chrome on both of these phones and see which one loads faster. So as you can see, they're both decently fast, but the Moto G Stylus 2021 is clearly the faster one. We're going to go to a web page real quick and see which one loads faster. Again, the Moto G Stylus 2021 is definitely a little bit faster. It's not like the Moto G Stylus 2020 is super slow or anything, but when they're compared side by side, you can definitely see that the Moto G Stylus 2021 is definitely a faster phone. Motorola has definitely made an improvement in the processor in this generation, so if speed is among the more important things to you, definitely keep this in mind. Now battery-wise, these phones both have a 4000 milliamp hour battery. Really the only difference is the Moto G Stylus 2021 supports 10 watt fast charging, whereas the Moto G Stylus 2020 doesn't. So really, as far as battery life and power goes, they are going to be the same. The only real difference is if you have a fast charger, then the Moto G Stylus 2021 might be a little bit better as far as that goes, but it's really going to be the same in performance. Now, unfortunately, the Moto G Stylus 2020 didn't have NFC and they did not make a change to that with the 2021 model, so neither of them are able to use Google Pay. I think that is a little bit of a disappointment. While that technology is usually reserved for more high-end and flagship phones, it would be nice to see more mid-level and entry-level phones getting that technology, especially these days. Things like Google Pay are becoming more and more popular, more and more accepted in different places. So it'd be really nice to see more phones get that technology. Now, as the name of these phones suggests, one of the most prominent features of the Motorola Moto G Stylus, whether it's the 2020 or the 2021 model, is the stylus, and we're going to test those out right now. So the main difference between these two styluses is how they're actually released from the phone itself. The Moto G Stylus 2020 has a stylus that you just pull out here, and when you want to put it back in, it just clicks. Now, they did make a change to this design with the 2021 model. Instead of pulling it out, you click it right here and it pops out instead. And now we're going to see how each one responds. Starting with the Moto G Stylus 2021. I don't see any problems here. It's really responsive. Yeah, as you can see here, there's really no problem. I'm terrible at coloring, by the way. Yeah, it really responds well. It feels good. There's not really any lag that I notice. Moving on to the Moto G Stylus 2020. It really does feel the same. There's no lag. It's really responsive. Gonna test out the drawing part real quick. It's definitely good. Honestly, it really does feel the same as the Moto G Stylus 2021. I don't really notice a difference that much. So really, I would say the main difference of these two styluses is the release. Really, as far as performance, they really feel exactly the same to me. Now, if you're comparing it to something like the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra, that's the complete top of the line, it's definitely not gonna have that type of quality. It doesn't feel like a real pen, as you could probably see in the demonstration. Although it is really responsive when I was drawing on there, it wasn't perfect. It definitely didn't go as fast as my finger was going, but at the same time, it is usable and I do think it's really good for what it is. Again, really the only difference that I see is that the Moto G Stylus 2020 has a stylus that you pull out, whereas the Moto G Stylus 2021 has one that you pop out. Really, other than that, I would say they're the same, and I really wouldn't base my decision on the stylus because I don't really see a whole lot of a difference at the end of the day. Now, in conclusion, which one of these is the better phone? I definitely would say, while they're really similar and the Moto G Stylus 2020 is still a great phone, they definitely made enough improvements on the 2021 model for me to confidently say that the Moto G Stylus 2021 is a better phone. This phone does have a few things I didn't particularly care for. I don't really like the front-facing camera that much. I personally prefer the front-facing camera on the Moto G Stylus 2020, but the phone is definitely noticeably faster. I do like the release of the stylus on this one a little bit better. I think it's a little bit more foolproof. It's definitely more durable. And as far as the overall performance goes, I do think the Moto G Stylus 2021 is a little bit better. That being said, the Moto G Stylus 2020 is still a great option. And if you're looking for a phone that's really in that mid-range, a bit of a step up from entry level, but not quite in the super high performance level, then you're really not gonna go wrong with either of these phones. Again, if you want some more information on the pricing and availability of them right now, be sure to check the links in the description because that'll have all of that. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, definitely be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.